Okay, so I guess I'm here to talk about Swoop, but I'm going to have a bit of a lead into that. So when I looked at the brief, it was about startup stories, and I think I really do have stories rather than story. So, and hopefully you'll sort of get something from the lead-in, because basically, for pretty much all of my career, I've been working on that bridge between research and exploitation, commercialisation, right? So, but for the first 25 plus years, it was within a big organisation called BHP. Some of you grey-haired types will probably know that BHP used to be a very big company before it became a big mining company. It was actually a big conglomerate. So there was iron and steel, obviously, Newcastle Steelworks, Wollongong, what have you, petroleum, sort of the services division, which I was mostly in, had the biggest transport division, ships, trains, and all sorts of things, the biggest engineering contracting organisation, the biggest Australian-owned IT service company. So it's a marketplace in itself, right? So, and I guess even from day one, when I joined as a trainee, I was a metallurgist. I worked in a research department in the wireworks, which is still operating actually over here in Mayfield. So, but I guess my first big exposure to research was working at the Central Research Laboratories. Now, if some of you don't know about BHP's research, we used to have two corporate research labs. One of them was actually in Newcastle. The facility is now owned by the University of Newcastle. It's the back of Shortland. It's near the golf club. There was another site in Melbourne, the Melbourne Research Laboratory, so probably 600 people all up, so very, very big institution. I actually joined them to install their computer systems, right? So, but I was really interested in this 1980s version of AI, right? So, and that was expert systems, and I managed to talk them into supporting a research program around expert systems in the 1980s. And it was mainly rule-based expert systems then, not so much what we hear today, the generative AI, which was neural network-based. We also did research in that area, but it was actually the rule-based expert systems that caught the imagination. So much so that, here's me 40 years ago, right? Sort of, I think that came out, it was a story about capturing the knowledge of that person there who was the general foreman at the Sinter plant at Newcastle and putting it into a computer so that other people could benefit from his knowledge, right? So that was the rhetoric at the time. It caught the imagination of the high press. So this is on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald. Murray leaves his brain with BHP. Right? So he was about to retire. This is a classic expert system story. And I sat down there and I, if you like, mined his knowledge about sintering. Over probably a month or two, we had something like 400 or 500 rules about how you operate this complex process. What I learned from that was that his knowledge was good, textbook knowledge. All the other operators respected Murray. They respected Murray more from Murray being Murray than Murray actually telling them, you know, what the rules were for doing this. So if the computer system said, turn the temperature up 3 degrees, they'd say, oh, I may or I may not. If Murray said turn the temperature up 3 degrees, they'd turn it up straight away. So this is my first learning about human nature. So, and this wasn't Murray, this is one of the operators. He wasn't a newbie, but you can see they were quite experienced, these guys. And this was an Apple Mac, right? So some of you older ones will remember, that was the first Mac. We actually had that running in this operating room full of iron ore dust. It didn't last too long because iron ore dust and computers don't mix too well. But nevertheless, that was that story. And I'll move on from there because I guess the end of that story, which I said, we had probably a research team of over 20 scientists between Newcastle and Melbourne. One of the publications at the time, the early 1990s, said that BHP had fielded over 50% of the expert systems in Australia at that point in time. So we did have a lot of success in a minor way. When I was talking to somebody, I think I put something online and said, I used to work for BHP, but I don't think I've got any connection with them anymore. You know, I can't remember anything now. I can't see any evidence of anything I did. And one of the retired people came back and said, you know, At BlueScope Steel, there is still a system that you started building that's still operating there 25 years ago. And I felt so good about that. I said, really? Oh, great. So this was right at the end of my time at BHP. I was working then for BHP IT, so I was moved from the research into the deployment department, which was IT, which was the IT division, which was a company by then that was operating in the external market as well. We'd morphed from expert systems to knowledge management. So in the 1990s, knowledge management was really a big thing. I came to it because we realised that expertise in the form of rules was just not sufficient. Right? Knowledge was much more than that, especially things about how people shared tacit knowledge. So explicit knowledge is like you write down the rules, you write down the knowledge. It's there, but the tacit knowledge was something that fascinated me. It's like, what do people know? So even back to the Maury days, what did he know that he could convey to people that wasn't explicit? So when he communicated with an operator, they took something in that was more than what I could get out of him. Right? So anyway, you'll see this thing here. This is like a network map. I got fascinated by social networks and social network analysis and how people connected through relationships and how they shared knowledge tacitly. Right? So, and one of the things that came out of that interest in social network analysis, I did a lot of analysis inside BHP about how people connected across the company, was this tool called, we call it the Community of Practice, or the COP tool. And if you look at that, it looks a lot like a social networking platform, doesn't it? It looks a bit like Yammer or something like that. But this was 1998, 1999, so we built this thing. It took off. You know, we had like 120 communities on this thing, and people were using it across the company to share knowledge. It was just sort of like, you know, this is sort of like one of the things you're saying, this is exactly what I wanted to happen. But shortly after that happened, the BHP management totally changed. We brought in a US CEO. He said there's much more value in the mining than anywhere else. He basically sold the company off. So we got sold off, the steel got sold off. Eventually, BHP now is just a mining company, right? It's a big mining company, but all of those other divisions were sold off, including the steel division that was mainly users of that. The petroleum was sold and so forth. So in the end, this went away. Now, I know, Taylor, you talk about regrets. I wouldn't call it a regret. I would call it a missed opportunity. But this is about 2000, and here was a tool that people were using to share knowledge within communities. Sounds a lot like Yammer, right? Yammer didn't start being built till about 2002, 2003, so 5 or 6 years later than this. Microsoft bought it for $1.2 billion. Right, so now you might say, do I have any regrets? Well, I don't have regrets in the sense that I didn't have the entrepreneurship to take something like this at the end of the days of BHP and go out, you know, probably move to the US, and, you know, I had a family, I had all this sort of stuff. So I guess it's sort of a whimsical reflection of what could have been. But when Yammer sold for 1.2 billion, now, having said that, we make our living out of building analytics on top of Yammer, now Viva Engage. That was our first product, right? So as I said, we got bought by a company called Computer Sciences Corporation. I started working for them in their research services area. I did much more mapping, social network analysis, stuff like that with them. But that led to my first external startup, which was called Optimize, 2007 to 2014. What happened then was that I got the opportunity to, this is about the time that I was finishing off my PhD at Sydney, but I was working on the networks and social capital in companies, right? And I was doing consulting with, I led a knowledge management community practice in CSC and across Australia, or APAC really, and I had a young Scandinavian guy who'd come out to work in Australia with CSC. He was really keen, he knew what I was doing, he wanted to work with me on some projects, whilst, you know, most of the people in the knowledge management section worked on information management, so I wasn't particularly interested in that. I was interested in this tacit conversion, so we got a few clients, and he was just so excited by this sort of stuff, is that when I left CSC, I was really just completing my thesis. He rang me up one day and he said, "I've just resigned." And I said, "What? You're only," he was like 30. I said, "You've got a young kid, you've got a mortgage. What are you doing?" And he said, "Remember you said we're going to start this company and do this sort of networking stuff?" I really couldn't remember. I said, "Really?" I said, "You've just taken on a big mortgage. You've got 2 kids. What are you doing?" And he says, "Yeah, no, we're going to do this. We're going to do this." So Kai is now. He's actually our CEO. So I would say he's the real entrepreneur. He's the one that, the classic one that puts the house and the kids on the line and gets out and just takes the risk and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I'd been in BHP for quite a while. I was reasonably well established. I still had kids at home, but still. So we built this. This is our first startup, and we didn't really. It was a consulting company, right, with some products. We had a guy who was helping us build the products. He was actually also from CSC, and he had his own business building web stuff, so we sort of contracted him to build a few little products. We didn't really know what we were doing, right? We sold the products online, and some of you are in that game now. We didn't get a lot for them. We didn't get a lot of customers. In fact, we were its best customers. So these tools were actually our tools. We became very good at running social network analysis projects. So you can see here we had quite a few customers, very international ones. It was very much a niche. We thought it was going to explode. It hasn't exploded. It's a very interesting area. There's a lot of research done in social network analysis, but commercially, it really hasn't taken off. It's just sat around the same sort of level. In those years, 7 or 8 years, we actually did over 100 projects. And by the end of it, we had these tools that we could actually, we could do them they were highly profitable projects. We found ourselves spending half the year winning the projects, because they weren't typical consulting projects that you just followed on and kept going. It's like a strategy project. Someone does a strategy and then they have to go to another company, get another strategy done and what have you. So we found ourselves spending more of our time selling. We could do the projects, really quickly with the tools. So one of our last ones was actually for the CommBank. We did 32,000 staff we mapped, so we had a good time on that, but something happened after that, which was sort of interesting. We initially collected data through surveys. We started looking at data that was passive, that we could get, and we could infer these networks from what people were doing. And this was about the time that Yammer, it was about the time when Yammer was bought by Microsoft, that's right. So Microsoft bought them, $1.2 billion. A lot of big companies were starting to use it because it was part of their Microsoft 365 subscription. And a lot of them were saying, "We don't know what this stuff is telling us. There's no analytics," or what have you. So some of our network knew what we'd done. We'd done some of these projects and mapped some of the early Yammer sort of networks. I think one of them actually had the Atlassian guys in it. So it was sort of quite new. But that led to this 2014 pivot. What you can see, this is the co-founders. That's myself, Kai, his wife, Marianne, who was helping us a little bit in the Optimise thing. She sort of came in as a full partner. The guy at the back is Marcus Dorr. He was one of our investors, our first investors. Now, you might have seen his face around here because he actually runs a company called MCI. MCI is a carbon capture company that came out of Newcastle Uni. He's actually based in Canberra. So now we thought, all right, well, the Microsoft guys came to us and said, we've got a few big banks here that are saying this stuff has no analytics, and we know you guys do analytics. I think you should be able to help them. Well, we're still a consulting company. We didn't actually really have a product, but we had a developer. And with Kai's energy, who loved the product stuff, we got together and we put this product together very quickly. We had a champion inside Westpac, and we also had one in Macquarie Bank that said, if you can build this thing, we'll buy it. So this is like, I know Richard, you say, you've got to get a customer first. This is the dream, right? Westpac, they're going to buy this thing, if we can come up with the right, So we hacked away. The developer was a good developer. He'd written a lot of the stuff. We used a lot of code we'd had from our tools anyway. And we built this thing, and And it went better than that, actually, because our champion in Westpac had got the ear of the CEO, Brian Harcher at the time, and he loved this thing because what it showed was who were the real influencers in Westpac, who were actually pulling the strings inside this big organisation. Now, remember, we'd done the Commonwealth Bank, so we knew how banks worked. And he said, I want part of that dashboard on my executive dashboard sitting in my office so I can keep track of my leaders and how they're engaging with the staff. So, of course, as a startup, we'd build anything, right? So we said, all right, we'll build this thing just for you. We'll call it the executive dashboard. And Brian Harcher had this executive dashboard with our dashboard up there, a subset, with his leaders. And then there was this story in the Financial Review that came out, and they were interviewing some of his direct reports, and they were saying, oh, you go into Brian's office, and like it's so confronting, your name's up there, how are you connecting with your staff or what have you? It really made me lift my game, I think the HR woman said. So we had a bit of a dream start with that, and of course then Telstra came along, and then we had Mars, and it sort of went from there. So I guess we got a bit lucky to start with, but I think once we started rolling, it did roll quite well. Now we had, in terms of funding, we said, well, we need to do the startup funding thing. What we did was, I don't know if I have a slide here about Swoop Analytics. All right, let's not talk to that slide yet. In terms of funding, we said, yeah, we'll probably need some funding because we're not going to get revenue straight away. In the end we did, but we thought we'll do the startup thing. I had a contact here, Eileen Doyle, in the Hunter Angels, so she was chair of the Hunter Angels at the time. We also had Marcus, who was very active in the Canberra network. So we just went to them and said, well, you guys work in startup land, what do we need to do? And we talked to them about it, and they said, well, come and pitch to our group. So we basically made two pitches, one to the Hunter Angels here and one to the Canberra Innovation Network. We were introduced through, if you like, close contacts. Those networks are pretty close, right? So if one of them invests, the others will say, I trust you, I'll invest as well. So pretty much with two pitches, we raised, I think it was $200,000. That $200,000 is actually still sitting in the bank. We haven't had to use it. But we do use, two of them became on our board. So Marcus is on our board, Eileen's on our board. We get regular sort of advice through our board from them. Sydney Angels, I think while I was talking to you, you were talking about the Sydney Angels thing. We thought, well, we should put, they have a process, you fill in the forms, whatever. We didn't even get past the first round. So again, it's the network that gets you I think the network is what gets you the money, right? It's sort of like you've got to be known to people, and it's the referral network that, So as I said, we spent nearly no time, like one pitch deck, to two different groups. We raised enough money. We could have spent that money in a year with developers. We didn't need to, thankfully, but nevertheless, I was pleased to get beyond that because it's a nightmare, some of that fundraising stuff. So anyway, we were going by then. So this is Swoop, and Richard, your strategizer business model canvas, we did use that initially. We actually just refreshed it, so we had a look at that. I'm using this to tell you a little bit about Swoop. We do appeal to the bigger end of town, right? So we actually discourage people with less than 5,000 people because we think our business model doesn't support small companies of less than 5,000 because they take as much human effort as someone with 50,000. Right? So I guess because of the style of analytics we do appeal to complex organisations, large complex organisations, like the Westpacs and the Telstras and the what have you. Once we moved overseas, they're actually even bigger, right? So at the moment, our biggest customer has 400,000 employees, and that's the Home Depot in the US. General Insurance, I think that was one we had. It had pretty close to the same. It was probably even a few more. But nevertheless, that's the segment that we're looking at. So clearly, and it is. Nearly half our customers are in Australia. We've got just under 90 customers, enterprise customers. just under half of them are in Australia, but they only earn us about 25% of the revenue. So our growth is clearly in the Northern Hemisphere, mostly North America, Canada, UK, Europe. What else have we got here? In terms of our value proposition, I think what people like about us is we're not, a lot of our competitors are IT type dashboard builders, right? So if you can plot it and put it up on a board somewhere. Now we come more from a people business side. Now, a lot of our customers are internal communications people or business people, if you like. They're not necessarily IT people. They get frustrated by IT often. So they like that we have actionable insights. We actually tell them what they should do from the data, not just show it to them. They often comment on how easy our software is to use. And I guess the other thing is that we do lead with thought leadership, and I mean I take responsibility for that. I'm the researcher, if you like. So we do benchmark reports. We've done that from the beginning. So we've benchmarked our customers against each other pretty much from the beginning. We write 2 major reports a year, over 100 pages, sort of not just analysis of trends, but case studies. So we've actually got more Viva Engage case studies than Microsoft have, so in our publications. So they actually refer to our case studies. So case studies are hard to get, like people, I'd say every one we approach, we probably get about 20% of them, I'd say, because of different security issues and all that sort of stuff. So but nevertheless, our reports are very rich with case studies and trends and so forth. So we lead with that. In terms of revenue model, we charge by the head. So when you get someone like Home Depot with 400,000 people, that looks pretty good for you. And that's the other reason why that when you've only got a company with 1,000 people, you have to work just as hard to get the same money, or to get a lot less money. Sorry. So we do focus on the higher end. We have built other products beyond Viva Engage, and I can talk a little bit about those. I will as we go forward. We contract for a year, and they pay by the head, as I said. We give discounts for multi-year type stuff. So we've got a number of customers that have signed up for multiple years. We have around 30 FTE at the moment, pretty much split 50-50 with developers and business people, if you like, or the rest, we call them, developers and the rest. In terms of cost, the cloud really has helped us, right? So, I think if we tried to build this company before the cloud, it would have been economically much more difficult. If you think about servers, having to manage servers in customer sites, we have a few customers that wanted the system running inside their wall, so we'd call that sort of custom servers and so forth, not the cloud. They become expensive to maintain, and also you're relying on their own IT people to update systems and so forth. So it's a bit of a nightmare, really, and we've really got to the point where unless they're very, very big, we don't do it. It's too complex. We are continually refreshing, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're working on now. Also, because of the place we work, this whole, SOC 2 compliance, the quality sort of stuff, this is like a license to operate for us. So we've invested quite a lot, and we continue to invest to make sure that we're compliant, because for the big organisations, if you don't have this, you're not a vendor, right? You can't be a vendor for them. So I think we got away with it for a while. We did get away with it for a while. If the CEO says, I want that, sometimes you can get away with it. The IT people just, they'll lie down if the CEO says, I want this, but mostly they don't, and some of them can actually, they'll block you. We had a government customer for 7 years before IT caught up and said, oh, we shouldn't allow that, and they just stopped it. I said, really? 7 years, And of course, the other thing is that we don't have an office. So we started with Optimise. Of course, there's only 2 of us, so we didn't have an office. We still don't have an office. And that's another story. But I really do think that we've benefited from that, especially with the developer people. They love just to sit in their trackies and hack away. Coming into an office like this, they would give money away not to have to do that. So our developers pretty much mostly in the Australian time zone. We have a few in Asia. We've got a couple in the UK. It works pretty well. In terms of the business people, we've got some in the US, in the UK, Europe. We've had people in Europe as well. Just mainly not so much doing. We don't do outbound selling. Mostly it's sort of we bring the leads in and then they follow those leads. So the thought leadership stuff, brings a lot of the leads in. We do run online conferences and that brings leads in as well. And these people follow those up pretty strongly. In fact, we're pushing that even more now. So that's the essence of the business. In terms of the timeline, I've talked about the first two elements, three, I think. So Meta introduced a competitor to Yammer called Workplace in 2016. We very quickly could build a product for that. It was really just a slight adaptation to what we had, and we're already on top of the Workplace thing. So we did quite well in that space. Different sort of clients, I must say. Microsoft really has big corporate clients. Workplace tended to be in that middle to lower market. So, but then of course last year, I think maybe it was last year or this year, they pulled the plug on it now. So Meta no longer supports that Workplace. So it was good and bad. It was good that we got them. It was bad that we lost them. So some of them, a lot of them have migrated to Viva Engage now, so we've got them back. But there was a gap, if you like, and we didn't get them all back. Some went to different tools. Now during COVID, this was a sort of lesson, I guess. Microsoft Teams was launched about 2017, but it really took off during COVID because how do people work together? They needed a digital environment. Teams, the Microsoft 365 platform itself became very important to people. We very quickly built out products for those two areas. I actually personally thought our Teams product was a brilliant product. We had lots of good customer feedback about what it could do. What we didn't have was a department in an enterprise that would buy it, right? IT wasn't going to buy it. The internal comms people had a stake, but they weren't a major buyer. So I guess the lesson for us here was that we didn't do enough of what, I guess, Richard, you were saying, you need to get out into the customers. We did a bit of that, and people were saying, this is brilliant, if we could have this, but that wasn't aligned with a function that had a budget that could buy something. And that was a lesson to me. It was sort of like, I thought this was a no-brainer, right? We thought people are going to have to work remotely, they're going to have to work in digital teams. Turns out that, digital teams didn't get created. We didn't have real teams. We had big groups of people mainly using Teams to have calls and to chat, and that was it. Pretty much what they'd done before. So they didn't really change that much. So those products we still have, but they sell a lot less than the Viva Engage one. We launched 2022 SharePoint Online. We did a much better job of customer research for that, and it's doing quite well. So it will probably catch up to and together, and it's got the same buying group. It's the internal communications group. So they are actually our main customer for those two products, and they're our best two products. 2024, I talked about our very big library of content that we have. I don't think anybody else, even Microsoft, doesn't have as much richness in their support than we have there. Interestingly, that helps us a lot with the AI stuff. So when you think about the generative AI, if you think beyond the training in the language and the ability to communicate, most enterprises don't want an AI sort of bot trained on their data, right? They want to keep that close to them. So in essence, what's happening is that the AI engine is searching through the local content, and they're using the language model to help with the interaction. And that's largely how it works. That's how our chatbot works with Dr. Swoop. So we built Dr. Swoop. We're still sort of evolving it. Probably a third of our customers are using it now. We don't charge them for it at the moment because we're still trying to understand what the model should be, and we're still trying to get validation, right, for this sort of thing. So, and beyond that, we've also looked at the analytics for chatbots. So a lot of people are building chatbots, but they're not actually aggressively implementing them because they don't quite trust them. They're worried about the hallucinations, they're worried about, sort of it giving incorrect answers and what have you. So everybody's building them, but nobody's deploying them at the moment. And there's an issue of trust. And this is the gap that we want to build with our analytics. We've used it with our own chatbot, obviously, and what we look for is when you're actually asking a question, it goes out and searches your stuff. If the matching isn't too good, what AI is very good at is filling the gap, right? And that gap is usually hallucination, right? So if you can understand what that gap is, you can understand where your content is lacking or the sorts of questions where you're not responding well. You can't stop AI from filling the gap. Not that we can see at the moment. You can minimise it, but it's still sort of there, and that little bit of doubt, is causing issues with them. So in essence, we've got into this sort of vibe coding. Like interestingly enough, we've got about 15 developers. They're all very heavily managed into this sort of iterative development sort of stage. And Kai and I, like we're the founders, we have trouble even breaking into that resource base because we get told by the head developer, if you want them to do that, what don't you want them to do? We said we want them to do it all. So we've started doing our own vibe, and eventually we're going to have to hire some extra developers and so forth. So I guess that's where that is. I think the other thing we're doing formally is we're calling it One Swoop, which is where we're bringing all of our products together into a single product. So it'll be a single product with options, so it's a different pricing model as well. It also means that those products that we didn't have a buyer for, or good buyers for, they'll be brought in with the ones that are doing quite well. We'll have to dream up a different sort of pricing model and an engagement model and so forth. We haven't done that yet, but we know that people are asking for it. We know that they're after that. So, as I said, the studies, this is just some of the, this is maybe 6 months old, but just give you an idea of some of the brands. One of our directors said to us, in the early days, he said, you're pretty cocky now, you're getting all these customers, he said, but you're going to lose some eventually. And we said, yeah, sure, we'll know that, but I must say that, there is a natural cycle. We typically keep customers for on average, about 3 to 4 years. All sorts of reasons why they leave, some are crazy, like the Westpac one, for example. Interestingly, they went away at one point because their IT department said, we can build that and save some money. 2 years later, they came back quite honestly, they were quite open. They said, we weren't able to build it. So I guess this is why you got a product. He said, we even heavied Microsoft to try and build it for us, and they couldn't do it either. So they came back. So you lose customers for some pretty weird reasons. Some are genuine, some are security related and all that sort of stuff. But you do have to get used to the fact that, even though your customers, they can love you, they can still leave, for different reasons, and especially at this big end where they have big restructures, all sorts of things can happen. But, thankfully, we've been able to grow pretty much on average about just under 30% a year, so that gets harder every year, obviously. So we'd like to keep more of we're very lumpy, so these are big customers. So if we lose a big one, it has a big impact on our NRR. Last year we had a bad year for NRR. We had a number of losses for all different reasons. Some of them we probably could have avoided, others we couldn't. But the general revenue growth, the net new customers have been pretty consistent, so that's been good. What time is it now? I don't know if no, we're probably running late, so I might leave it here. I was going to show a little bit of the product, but you can see a little bit of what the dashboard looks like. You can see the obviously network maps that come through our what have you. Yeah, I think, and these little. It's not shown on this one, but we have Dr. Swoop can get called from here. Well, they can actually click on any report and it'll give a contextual analysis of it. So say, this is what this report means, this is how it compares to other organisations, this is what a good number is and so forth. So we think we're well placed on the AI front, but we're still quite not ready to pull the trigger properly because the market is just so crazy. Anyway, I should leave some time for questions, so I think I'll just leave it there. Yeah.
The early 2000, that 2000 to 2010 period must have been wild, given the rise of social media.
Yeah.
Was that sort of like a precursor for a market wave that you could ride through, be it your consulting firm or Swoop?
Yeah, the Facebook time, the Facebook Inside, which was Yammer, that was a pretty exciting time. The fact that we had this tool we'd built in the 1990s, that we sort of knew this is what should be coming. But the other thing you notice is that not all the early leaders win, right? So Facebook wasn't the first social media platform, right? There was MySpace, there was a few others. Google didn't even win, they weren't the first search engine, so it's not always the first to market that wins, and you have to ask yourself, well, what is it that Facebook did, that Google did, that, some of these, and in the AI space, I guess it is OpenAI that's led the way in terms of generative AI. They're still leading, right? So but is somebody going to come and just wave that away? I don't think so now for them, because they've been going long enough, but it was there's a number of waves, which we've been riding waves since I rode the wave in AI in the 80s, the knowledge management wave in the 90s, that 2001, that's the social media sort of wave, sort of now we're back in the generative AI wave, so I'm back onto that again. So it's exciting, it's surfing. I love it, sort of, but, you get the hype, everybody joins in, so the customers have a hard time working out what's real. And what you do find, maybe this is a lesson, if you look to the US, you'll always find somebody doing what you're doing and looking like they're doing it better. What I could say to you is hang around a bit and wait, because they're wonderful at marketing. People in the US are wonderful at marketing, and what you often find is there's not much there, and it'll blow away or what have you. So have faith, I think, and keep watching it, because a lot of the things that come out, they don't sustain. If you can execute well and it's there, especially at the big end, they want stuff that really does work. They don't sort of gamble too much. They do a lot of due diligence. So this is part of our thought leadership. We've got articles in journals, we've got articles in lots of industry things, we've got lots of referential stuff. We don't have the brochure type stuff, they don't rely on the brochure stuff. They want to dig deep, it's there, right? So I think we use that as a way of validating, sort of what we're doing, that we know what we're doing. So we're pretty comfortable in our own shoes about, we know this area pretty well, so we're not just flying in, trying to take an opportunistic sort of jump and what have you. So that's probably why that more established end sort of seemed to be a hotspot for us, because there's a lot of fluff out there, and with the AI stuff, we're just waiting at the moment for it to settle a bit, because we've got customers that can validate what we do, so we don't need to go out and find new customers for this. We can get our existing customers to try things. We don't have to charge them or anything like that. They're happy to do it and try it and give us feedback and so forth. So really sort of, when you get to this, I guess we did about 5.5 million last year, so we're getting there in terms of, we've been told by people that around 5 to 6 million US, and you pretty much made it. We've been profitable pretty much from day one. So, as I said, our startup funding is still sitting in the bank. So we actually paid a dividend this year. Like, that's crazy, people said. So we thought, we've got this. People would say, well, you should have spent that in growing and what have you. We're still spending a lot on that, but we thought, well, we've gone 11 years now, so some of our investors at least need to see a token of, you're getting something back, So, and ourselves as well, so you remember you're in the business for so long, it's sort of like, well, we don't overpay ourselves, but, sometimes you feel like you should have a bit of a reward for having taken that risk. But, we still, and also there's you still have to pay tax, so. They still get you there. So.
Does anyone else have a question? Yeah.
On one of your slides, you display that you were raising with challengers like 200,000 as well as with Canberra. Before to meet them, like if it was for the development of your product, how timeline did you have to show them to say, okay, I would like to ask you for this money, and here is the money will be spent over, I don't know, 24, 36 months?
Yeah, well, what I can tell you is that angel investors are much friendlier than venture capital investors, right? So when I was in BHP in the research labs, BHP had actually made an investment in a venture capital fund, $40 million, which is a fair bit back then, but the intent wasn't to make money. They didn't need the money, if you like, but it was to get a window in the world of what was coming new, right? So we were, as a corporate research lab, we were very close to that. So I worked with a lot of those venture capitalists, on different projects, they just brought us in to say, what do you think about this? I found them very, they were often young, they're very financially focused and not friendly at all, right? So we actually got flown over to the US to build an expert system for one of their investments, which was a waste disposal company in Detroit. So we went over there for a few weeks, he built this system for them, they loved it, and all that sort of stuff. This company, this guy was, the CEO was, he had one of those names with the third on it, like he was the third generation, and he wanted to grow the company globally from their, they were based around the Great Lakes, and he wanted to grow it globally, and he got the venture capital, to help support that growth. We heard afterwards, and he wrote us a lovely letter about how well we'd done in getting the essence of their knowledge out and all that, but we heard later that they actually sacked him and put somebody else in. So they can be very brutal. Angel investors themselves, most of them, the Newcastle ones, mostly are retired people, retired business people. They're basically, if I was to be brutally honest, it's money they can afford to lose. So they are a bit like me. They like the whole set-up vibe. They like talking to people like yourselves that have got the energy and the sort of things that they probably did in their youth. So it wasn't a big deal for them. I can tell you they put in $25,000 each. So that might be a lot to you and me, but for them, it's in their super fund, all this sort of stuff. So we haven't had any real demands from that group at all. The biggest demand they give us each year is they want to get our financial statements for their super fund. That's probably their biggest demand. We used to have lunches with them, so they'd come back and we'd talk to them about what we were doing, and they could provide advice if they wanted to. They didn't need to if they wanted to. Same in Canberra as well. Canberra, they're a little bit younger. They're a bit more of a network like this, so they weren't like retired angels, but they were probably, but they were business people that had run successful businesses. So again, they didn't have any expectations that we want to return in whatever. I think really they had, it was money they'd put into their super, it was sitting there. If we happened to be one of the ones that were wildly successful and got a good exit, with their super we get a big boost, it's probably sitting in pension mode, so they don't have to pay tax, all that sort of stuff. So I think if you were after money, I'd look at the angels first. The venture capital can be very hard. I found the Sydney ones, it's, as I said, it gets fairly bureaucratic. As I said, if you can build relationships with some of the people around them and start, working, just getting known, getting help, going to events like this, build your network and what have you, I think it's much easier then. But as I said, we don't have a depth of fundraising. I mean, I think if I talked about my time, so when working as an entrepreneur, getting funds were really like getting the corporate to put some money into a project that, wasn't a delivery project. A lot of that, again, was relationships as well, people sort of networking to the people that hold the money. That's pretty important. Even when you're selling, it's important to know who's got the money. Right? So a lot of customers can say they love what you do, but if they don't have the money inside, you still won't win them as a customer. And I guess that's the learning I spoke to about, the way budgets are set up. I probably should have known this from having worked in corporate for so long, but budgets are allocated to different divisions and that's how they spend it. If you've got something that appeals to multiple divisions, one of the names we had up there was Nestle, which we don't have anymore. They had a situation where the budget, the people that paid for us, they pulled the budget and they said, you've got to get it from everybody else. And we had the numbers of who were using it, right? So we said, well, here's all the people that are using it. They ran around with a hat, to sort of try and build the budget to pay for the product, and they couldn't do it. they couldn't do it, you know. So because there wasn't just one group that had a budget that said, I'm going to spend that. You've got to go fundraise to get a budget, you know. It's just hard work, you know. So yeah.
Your product looks at how employees of organisations interact and communicate and socialise.
Yep.
As an organisation that doesn't have an office and is virtual, how do you guys do what strategy you have to stay together and connected?
Yeah. Well, you know, we benchmark and we're the best. so yeah, we're too small to be in our benchmarking studies. We generally say you've got to have at least 200 people before you're part of our benchmarks. But of course, we include our own numbers. You know, we practice what we preach. So in essence, as a virtual company, you know, we rely on Viva Engage and Teams and what have you. I mean, it's not perfect, you know. So getting together physically is important. You know, we do once a year. We do get together. At least those in the Australia and Asia get together. We also do the same in the UK at least once a year. So get people together. Usually, what we try to do is double it with not in Australia, but in UK, we try to double it with a customer event. So we'll organise a customer event. Usually we have customers who are happy to host us to run events in their premises and invite other customers in or prospects because they like the idea of networking themselves. So we just ran one in Toronto in Canada, we're running another one in the UK, we've just finished one in London. So these are ones that are relatively low investment because we use customers' premises. We do a lot of you know, social media, LinkedIn, reach out, that sort of stuff. We've got quite extensive mailing lists that we're learning to use better. You know, so we hired a sales director recently who works in this area of marketing online, and he told our people aren't hardened salespeople. I'd say they're more consultants. So whereas he was more of a hardened sales guy, and he said, you know, something that surprised me. He said, well, you know, don't stop sending people emails until, you know, you've got to send them at least 7 emails before you give up on them. You know, our people would say, oh, they didn't answer 2, I'm out of here. You know, and sort of said, no, keep going. And he was right, you know, like, so now on our Yammer network, people come back, you know, so-and-so answered, it was the 6th one I sent, and they've answered and we've engaged and what have you. So you learn something all the time about this, you know, how you engage with that. But yeah, we rely on those systems quite a lot. We use them, I mean, and as I said, our developers love being able to work from home. Most of our business people still get to travel, obviously. They go, we do run these face-to-face events, but we do a lot of online events. So we run 2 online events, which we have probably well over 1,000 registrants from around the world. We'd never draw that number of people in a physical space, you know, like not even half that number. Like even online, you might, if you get 2,000, 1,000 will show up, right? You get 1,500, you probably know that anyway. But you know, we're happy to get, you know, 600, 700 or something coming to an online event, and of course you get their contact details, you get all that sort of stuff. So it's a big lead generator for us. You know, so.
Unfortunately, that is all we have time for because it is almost 9 o'clock and I know some people have to head off to work. Can we all give a massive round of applause to
Thank you. Okay, thanks for coming.